Sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do in the Old West isn't drawing his gun. It's opening his door. Wade Hutchins learned that truth on a Tuesday morning in September of 1883, when he found two half-dead strangers buried in his hayloft and made a choice that would cost him the only thing he had left, his peace. But here's what they don't tell you about mercy in the territories. It always comes with a price tag written in blood, and Wade was about to find out exactly how much his conscience was worth. The Wyoming plains stretched out like God's own emptiness that morning, all sagebrush and silence under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Wade's ranch sat in the middle of nowhere by design, 15 miles from the nearest town, with nothing but wind and memory for company. He liked it that way. Had liked it that way for 15 years, ever since he'd built the place with his own hands and filled it with furniture for a family that never came. You get used to loneliness out here. You get used to the sound of your own boots on wooden floors, the way your voice echoes in rooms built for laughter that never arrived. Wade had made his peace with silence. He'd married it in a way. Every morning was the same. Coffee boiled, black and bitter, eggs fried in yesterday's grease, then out to the barn before the sun cleared the mountains. Routine was religion when you lived alone, but routine died the moment Wade climbed into his hayloft with a pitchfork and saw the blood. Not much of it, just enough to paint a story across the scattered straw. Fresh blood, dark and wet, leading to a corner where something had burrowed deep into the hay like an animal trying to hide from wolves. Wade's hand went to his belt, fingers brushing the handle of his skinning knife. Cattle thieves, maybe. Drifters looking for a warm place to sleep off a drunk. He'd run off plenty of both over the years, but something about the blood made him hesitate. It wasn't splattered. It was smeared, dragged. The kind of blood trail left by someone who was hurt but still moving, still trying to survive. And there was something else. A smell underneath the copper tang of blood. Something sweet and sick that made Wade's stomach turn. He approached slow, pitchfork ready. The hay shifted. A sound emerged, barely human, a wheeze like wind through a broken bellows. Wade pulled back the straw with the fork's tines, and his breath caught hard enough to hurt. Two people. A young woman, maybe 22 or 23. Curled on her side with her arms wrapped around a swollen belly that left no question about her condition. She was maybe 7 months along, maybe 8. Her face pale as bleached bone and smudged with ash. Her dress, what was left of it, had been nice once. Calico with small flowers, but now it was scorched black at the hem and torn at the shoulders. And pressed against her back, one skeletal arm draped over her like he was trying to shield her even in sleep, was an old man. 60, maybe older, gray-bearded and breathing in shallow gasps that rattled in his chest, like dice in a cup. His shirt was stained with sweat and blood, his hands wrapped in filthy bandages that had once been white. Wade stood there, pitchfork still raised, and felt 15 years of careful solitude crack right down the middle. The woman's eyes opened. They were dark, almost black, and they looked at Wade without surprise, without fear, without anything at all. Just flat acceptance, like she'd already decided how this was going to end and was too tired to fight it. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at him with those hollow eyes while her hand drifted down to rest on her belly. Protective even in surrender. "Who are you?" Wade's voice came out harder than he meant, rough from disuse and shock. The woman's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Behind her, the old man stirred, his eyes flickering open, pale blue and watery with fever. His lips moved. "Please." The word was barely a whisper, frayed at the edges. "Please. Don't." Wade's first instinct was simple. Get them out. He didn't know these people, didn't owe them anything, and trouble had a way of spreading like wildfire in the territories. You help the wrong person, you end up with a rope around your own neck or a bullet in your back. That's just how it worked. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to point them toward the road and forget he ever saw them. Let them be someone else's problem. But then the old man tried to stand. He pushed himself up with arms that shook like branches in a gale, got maybe 6 inches off the ground before his strength gave out completely. He would have face-planted into the hay if Wade hadn't dropped the pitchfork and lunged forward, catching him by the shoulders. The old man weighed nothing, just bone and fever-hot skin stretched tight over a frame that was giving up. Up close, Wade could see the rope burns on his wrists, red and raw and recent. He could see the way the man's pupils were different sizes, the bruising along his jaw that spoke of fists and boots, and he could smell it now, that sickly sweet smell. Infection, deep and spreading. Easy, old-timer. Wade lowered him back down, gentle as he could manage. You ain't going anywhere like this. The old man's fingers clutched at Wade's shirt with surprising strength, pulling him close. His breath was hot and wrong-smelling. My daughter, he gasped. Please. She hasn't done anything. Please. Wade looked at the young woman. She still hadn't spoken, but tears were sliding down her face now, silent and steady. Her hand still rested on her belly. And Wade watched it move with the baby's kicks, life insisting on itself even in the middle of all this death and running. He thought about his empty house. He thought about his coffee, cooling on the kitchen table. He thought about 15 years of careful, cultivated peace. And then he thought about watching this old man die in his hay, while his pregnant daughter stared at nothing with those dead-alive eyes. Damn it, Wade muttered, and made the choice that would change everything. Getting them into the house took the better part of an hour. The old man couldn't walk, so Wade half-carried, half-dragged him across the yard while the daughter followed behind, moving like a ghost, her hands pressed to her belly, and her eyes locked on her father. Wade set the old man up in the guest room, a space that hadn't seen use in over a decade. Furniture covered in dust sheets and air stale with disuse. He stripped the coverings, got the man onto the bed, started peeling away the filthy clothes. The daughter stood in the doorway, watching, still silent. The wounds underneath made Wade's jaw clench. Rope burns on the wrists and ankles, bruises everywhere, purple, black, and yellow at the edges. And on the man's side, a gash, maybe 4 inches long, poorly bandaged and leaking corruption. It had been caused by something sharp, a knife maybe, or broken glass. It needed stitching and carbolic and probably more doctoring than Wade could provide. But the nearest physician was in town, 15 miles of hard riding, and Wade had a feeling these two didn't want to be anywhere near town. He sent the daughter to the kitchen with instructions to boil water, had to repeat himself twice before she seemed to hear him, and set about doing what he could. He cleaned the wound, stitched it with the same thread he used to mend tack, poured whiskey over it until the old man gasped and thrashed. Then he wrapped it tight, covered the man with blankets, and went to check on the daughter. She was standing at the kitchen stove, staring at the pot of boiling water, like she'd forgotten what it was for. Up close, in better light, Wade could see more details. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe only 20. Her hair was black, long and tangled, with pieces of straw still caught in it. Her skin was sun-dark, her features sharp and delicate. And her eyes, those haunted eyes, were ringed with shadows so deep they looked like bruises. You need to drink something, Wade said, keeping his voice soft. When's the last time you ate? She didn't answer, just kept staring at the pot. Wade fetched a cup of water from the pump, pressed it into her hands. She looked at it like she didn't recognize what it was. then drank it down in 3 desperate gulps, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she set the cup down carefully and finally looked at Wade. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Thank you." 2 words, barely a whisper, her voice raw and unused. Wade nodded, didn't push for more. He made her sit at the kitchen table, put together a plate of bread and cold beef, watched her eat like she was starving, which she probably was. Then he went back to check on the old man, who was awake now, fever-bright eyes tracking Wade's movement across the room. "You're wondering what you got yourself into," the old man said. His voice was stronger now, fed by adrenaline or fear or both. "You're wondering if you made a mistake. I'm wondering who's going to come looking for you," Wade replied, pulling up a chair, "and what they're going to do when they find you." The old man's face crumpled. For a moment he looked like he might cry, but he swallowed it back, forced himself to stay steady. "My name is Samuel. The girl, my daughter, her name is Clara, and we're running from men who want to see us dead." Wade had figured as much. "What did you do?" "We loved the wrong person." The words hung in the air like smoke. Wade waited. Samuel's eyes drifted to the ceiling, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man telling his last confession. "Clara was married. Good man. Good husband. His name was James Whitfield, half Shoshone, half Irish, and that made him less than nothing to some people. But he loved my girl like breathing, worked hard, kept his head down. We had a little homestead about 40 miles east of here. Nothing much, but it was ours. We thought if we stayed quiet, stayed to ourselves, they'd leave us alone." Wade's stomach tightened. He knew where this was going. 3 weeks ago, a rancher's son got himself killed in town, stabbed in a bar fight over cards. They needed someone to hang for it, and James was convenient. Half-breed, married to a white woman, easy target. Didn't matter that he was home with us that night. Didn't matter that 20 people saw the real killer do it. They came for him anyway. Samuel's voice cracked. Clara tried to stop them. She was 4 months along, screaming, begging. They dragged James out of our house and strung him up from our own barn beam while she watched. And when she tried to cut him down herself, they beat her until she couldn't stand. Wade felt something cold settle in his chest. "I got her away that night," Samuel continued. "Took what we could carry and ran, but they came back 2 days later and burned the homestead. Said we were harboring criminals, that we'd stolen the rancher's property. Lies, all lies, but it doesn't matter. They're hunting us now, saying Clara's husband was a murderer, and we helped him escape. There's probably a reward." He turned his head to look at Wade, and his eyes were desperate. "They won't stop. Men like that never stop." Wade stood, walked to the window, stared out at his empty land. "Why didn't you go to the law?" Samuel laughed, bitter and broken. The law was holding the rope. Of course it was. Wade had seen it before, the way justice worked in the territories when you were the wrong color, the wrong person. He'd told himself for 15 years it wasn't his problem, that he'd carved out his peace and that was enough. But now that peace was sitting in his guest room, dying of infected wounds and asking for mercy. "She's all I have left," Samuel whispered, "and what's in her belly, that's all that's left of James. Please, I'm asking you as one man to another, just until I'm gone, then send her north to my sister in Montana. I've got the address. Just keep her safe until then." Wade turned back, looked at the old man, at Samuel, and saw the truth written in every line of his face. He was dying. Maybe had a week if the infection didn't take him sooner, and he was spending his last breaths begging a stranger to protect his daughter. "I'll keep her safe," Wade heard himself say, and felt the last of his 15-year peace crumble into dust. Samuel's eyes closed, relief washing over his features. "Thank you. God bless you, sir." Wade left him to rest, went back to the kitchen. Clara was still at the table, hands wrapped around the empty plate, like she was afraid someone would take it. She looked up when Wade entered, and for the first time, he saw something other than emptiness in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also a fragile, desperate hope. "Your father told me what happened," Wade said. "I'm sorry. About your husband, about all of it." Clara's throat worked. She touched the scorched photograph she'd pulled from her pocket. A young man with kind eyes and a shy smile, his arm around a younger, happier version of Clara. "They said he was nothing," she whispered. "They said he didn't deserve to live. But he was everything. He was everything." Wade nodded, didn't trust himself to speak. That night, Wade stood on his porch and stared at the horizon, rifle in his hands and his mind churning. He thought about the men Samuel had described, the kind of men who would burn a homestead and hang an innocent man and call it justice. They were out there somewhere, looking, and if they found Clara and Samuel here, they'd come. They'd come with torches and guns and righteous anger, and Wade would have to choose, stand and fight for two strangers who'd brought their nightmare to his door, or step aside and watch them die. He looked back at his house, saw lamplight in the windows, shadows moving inside. For the first time in 15 years, his home didn't look empty. It looked full, full of need, full of pain, full of life that was hanging on by a thread. Wade checked the load in his rifle, walked the perimeter of his property, and bolted the gate. They were staying, and he'd deal with whatever came next when it arrived. But here's the question that kept Wade awake that night. The question that would haunt him through everything that followed. When you've spent 15 years building walls around your heart to keep the world out, what happens when you finally let someone in? And more importantly, when the wolves come howling at your door, demanding blood? How much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to protect people you barely know? Wade was about to find out, and the answer would cost him more than he ever imagined. Wade woke on the third morning to the smell of coffee he didn't make, and for a moment, just one brief, disorienting moment, he forgot he was alone. The scent pulled him out of bed before his mind caught up, his feet hitting the cold floor on instinct. He pulled on his boots and shirt and walked into his kitchen to find Clara standing at the stove, her back to him, one hand pressed to her lower spine, while the other stirred something in a pot. She'd cleaned up. Her hair was braided, her face scrubbed, and she was wearing one of Wade's old shirts over her torn dress because she had nothing else. The shirt hung on her like a tent, but she'd rolled the sleeves carefully. And Wade noticed she'd swept the floor. Actually swept it. The pile of dust and debris sat neat in the corner, waiting for the dustpan he'd probably buried in a closet 10 years ago. She turned when she heard him, and for a second they just looked at each other. Two strangers sharing a space that belonged to neither of them, both waiting to see what came next. Then Clara nodded toward the coffee pot. "I made it strong," she said quietly. "Didn't know how you liked it." Wade cleared his throat. "Strong's good." He poured himself a cup, tasted it, and felt something crack open in his chest. It was perfect. She'd made it exactly the way he'd been making it himself for 15 years, black as sin and bitter enough to wake the dead. How she'd known, he couldn't say. Maybe suffering made you observant. Maybe when you were running for your life, you learned to read people fast. "Your father?" Wade asked. Clara's face tightened. Fever broke during the night. "He's sleeping now." It was the most she'd said since that first night, and Wade took it as progress. He sat at the table and watched her work, watched her move carefully around the kitchen, learning the space, figuring out where things belonged. She'd found the eggs, found the skillet, and now she was cooking breakfast with the quiet competence of a woman who'd done this 1,000 times before. For her husband, Wade realized. For James Whitfield, the half-breed who loved her like breathing and died with a rope around his neck while she screamed. Wade drank his coffee and didn't ask questions. Questions could wait. Right now, at this moment, he just let her cook and pretended that this small, domestic scene was normal. That his kitchen always smelled like eggs and coffee instead of dust and loneliness. That he always had someone to share breakfast with instead of eating standing up at the sink. It was a lie, but it was a comfortable one, and Wade let himself sink into it. But lies don't last long in the territories, and peace is always temporary. Samuel lasted 4 more days. 4 days of Wade changing bandages and spooning broth between the old man's cracked lips while Clara sat by his bedside, holding his hand and whispering things Wade couldn't hear. 4 days of watching Samuel's skin go from fever red to gray, watching his breathing get shallower, watching the life leak out of him drop by drop like water from a cracked bucket. Wade had seen men die before, in the war, in bar fights, from bad water and worse luck. But this was different. Samuel wasn't fighting. He was surrendering, letting go with the quiet dignity of a man who'd already said his goodbyes. On the 4th night, Samuel woke lucid for the first time in days. Clara was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an angle that would hurt when she woke, her hand still clutching her father's. Wade was checking the bandages when Samuel's eyes opened, clear and focused. "You're a good man," Samuel whispered. His voice was thin as paper. Wade shook his head. "I'm just doing what's right." "That's what makes you good." Samuel's fingers twitched, reaching. Wade took his hand. "Promise me something." Wade already knew what he'd ask. "I'm listening. Promise me she'll have a life, that baby she's carrying. Promise me it'll grow up knowing it was wanted, that it was loved, that its father was a good man who died for nothing but other people's hate." Samuel's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Don't let them make her ashamed. Don't let them make her hide." Wade looked at Clara, sleeping with her hand on her belly, her face finally peaceful. He thought about the homestead burned to ash, about James Whitfield swinging from a barn beam, about the kind of men who did those things and called it righteousness. And he thought about his empty house, his 15 years of careful solitude, and how easily it had all crumbled the moment he'd let himself care. "I promise," Wade said. Samuel's eyes closed. "Thank you." The words were barely breath. "Thank you." He died 2 hours later, just as the sun was coming up, quiet, peaceful. Clara was awake by then, and she held her father's hand as he slipped away, her tears falling silent and steady onto the quilt Wade had tucked around him. Wade stood in the doorway and watched the life leave Samuel's body, watched Clara fold forward over her father's chest, watched her shoulders shake with grief she didn't make a sound for. When it was done, Wade stepped forward and gently pulled Clara back. "Come on," he said softly. "Let me take care of him." Clara looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "He was all I had left." "I know. Everyone I love dies." Wade didn't have an answer for that. He just wrapped Samuel in the cleanest quilt he owned and carried him outside to the hillside, where the morning light hit first. Clara followed, moving slow, her hands pressed to her belly like she was trying to hold herself together through force of will. Wade dug the grave himself, 6 feet down in rocky soil, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cool morning air. Clara sat on a stump and watched, and when it was done, when Samuel was lowered down and covered over, she stood and spoke the first real words she'd said since that night in the hayloft. "You kept us safe, Papa." Her voice cracked but held. "You did what you promised. You kept us safe." Wade stood with his hat over his heart and listened to the wind move through the grass. He'd buried people before, but this felt different. This felt like accepting responsibility, like signing a contract written in dirt and grief. Samuel had passed his daughter to Wade like a sacred trust. And now, Wade was standing over the old man's grave, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep, but he'd try. God help him, he'd try. The days after the burial were strange and quiet. Clara stayed, not because she was too weak to leave anymore, though Wade suspected she was still recovering, but because she had nowhere else to go. Montana was 500 miles north, and Clara was 7 months pregnant and grieving and alone. Wade didn't ask her to leave, didn't even hint at it. He just moved through his routines and let her find her place in them. And slowly, carefully, something like a rhythm developed. Clara took over the cooking. Wade tended the horses and mended fences. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, not talking much, just existing in the same space, and watch the sun go down over the empty plains. Sometimes Clara would pull out that scorched photograph of her husband and just hold it, her thumb tracing his face like she was trying to memorize features she was terrified of forgetting. And sometimes Wade would catch himself watching her, wondering what it must be like to love someone so much that losing them broke you in half. One evening, about a week after Samuel's death, Clara broke the silence. "His name was James," she said softly, not looking at Wade. "James Whitfield. He was 24. We met at a church social, if you can believe that. My father about had a fit when I told him I wanted to court a half-breed, but James," she smiled, small and sad. "James was so gentle, so patient. He won my father over in about 3 days, made him laugh, made him see that blood doesn't determine a man's worth. His character does." Wade nodded, staying quiet, letting her talk. "We were married 2 years, built that homestead with our own hands. I got pregnant last spring, and James was so happy. He built a cradle, carved little horses into the sides because he loved horses." Her voice wavered. "They burned it with everything else. The cradle, our clothes, the only home we'd ever made together. They burned it all and said we deserved it." "You didn't," Wade said firmly. "And neither did he." Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, and Wade saw the question in her eyes before she asked it. "Why are you doing this? You don't know us. We brought you nothing but trouble. Why didn't you just send us away?" Wade considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated. Tangled up in 15 years of loneliness and choices he'd made and regretted. But the simple version was easier. "Because I was tired of being alone. And because your father was right, that baby deserves a life." Clara's hand drifted to her belly. "I hope they have his eyes," she whispered. "I hope they have something of him." "They'll have you," Wade said. "That's something." For the first time since he'd found her in his hayloft, Clara's smile reached her eyes. But peace never lasts in the territories, and trouble has a way of finding you no matter how far you run. Wade rode into town 3 days later for supplies: flour, coffee, beans, lamp oil, the basics. He didn't like leaving Clara alone, but she'd insisted she was fine, and Wade needed ammunition more than he needed peace of mind. The ride into Shallow Creek took 2 hours through open country, and Wade spent most of it scanning the horizon, watching for riders, feeling the weight of his rifle across his saddle. He was jumpy now, always waiting for the other boot to drop. Shallow Creek was the kind of town the territories were full of. One main street, 2 saloons, a general store, and a church that saw more mice than congregants. Wade hitched his horse and walked into Patterson's general store, nodding to the owner behind the counter. He grabbed what he needed quickly, kept his head down, tried to be invisible. That's when he heard the voices. "Rewards up to 200 now," someone was saying from the other side of a shelf stacked with canned goods. $200 for information leading to the capture of that pregnant squaw and her father. They're saying they burned their own homestead to cover up theft, that her half-breed husband was a murderer. Wade's hand froze on a bag of coffee beans. "I heard they're still in the area," another voice chimed in. "Can't have gotten far, not with her in that condition. Sheriff says anyone who spots them should report immediately. Dangerous criminals, both of them." Wade's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He forced himself to keep moving, forced himself to grab the ammunition he needed, forced himself to walk to the counter like he hadn't heard a word. But his mind was racing. $200. That was enough to make good men do bad things, and there weren't many good men in Shallow Creek to begin with. If someone had seen Clara and Samuel, if someone had tracked them to Wade's property. He paid quickly, loaded his supplies, and rode out of town like the devil was on his heels. The ride home felt 3 times as long. Every shadow looked like a rider. Every sound made Wade's hand drift to his rifle. By the time he crested the hill above his ranch, his nerves were wound tight enough to snap. But the property looked quiet. No horses, no smoke, no signs of trouble. Clara was in the garden she'd started planting, her back to him, working the soil with her hands like she was trying to grow hope from dirt. Wade put the horse away and brought the supplies inside, but he couldn't shake the feeling crawling up his spine like spiders. That night he reinforced the door to the house, checked the load in both his rifles, kept his pistol within arm's reach. Clara noticed the tension, saw the way Wade kept glancing at the windows, and her face went pale. "They're close, aren't they?" she asked. Wade didn't lie. "Maybe." Clara's hand went to her belly, protective and afraid. "I should leave. I should go before they find me here and hurt you too." "You're not going anywhere," Wade said flatly. "Your father asked me to keep you safe. That's what I'm doing." "But, no buts, Clara. You're staying." Wade met her eyes, saw the fear there, saw the guilt. "I'm not letting anyone take you. I swore it, and I keep my word." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand why you care." Wade thought about his empty house, his 15 years of careful solitude, the way Clara's coffee tasted like home. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but I do." That night, Wade didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his lap and watched the darkness, waiting. Clara tried to stay up with him, but exhaustion pulled her under around midnight, and Wade listened to her breathing even out from the guest room. The silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the wind and the occasional creak of the house settling. Around 3 in the morning, Wade saw them. Lantern lights in the distance. 3 of them, moving slow across the plains, sweeping back and forth like they were searching. They were maybe 2 miles out, but they were heading in Wade's direction, and his blood turned to ice. He watched until dawn, watched the lights get closer, watched them finally veer off to the north and disappear. But they'd been there. They'd been close. The hunters were circling, and it was only a matter of time before they closed in. When Clara woke, she took one look at Wade's face and knew. "They came, didn't they?" Wade nodded. "How long do we have?" "I don't know, but not long." Clara stood there in his borrowed shirt, her belly round with life, her face set with a determination Wade hadn't seen before. "Then we prepare. Tell me what to do." And so they did. Wade taught Clara how to load and fire Samuel's old revolver. Her hands shook, but she learned fast. They moved supplies into the root cellar, created fallback positions, planned for the worst. And every night Wade kept watch while Clara slept, his rifle ready, his mind churning through scenarios that all ended in blood. 2 nights later, the riders came. Wade saw them at sunset. 5 men this time, riding hard and direct. No more circling. They came straight for his property, and Wade's stomach dropped like a stone. He grabbed his rifle, yelled for Clara to get inside, and met them at the gate. The leader was a hard-faced man with a scar running through his eyebrow and eyes like chips of flint. He reined up 10 feet from Wade, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Evening, friend. We're looking for 2 fugitives, a pregnant Indian woman and her father. Heard you might have seen them." Wade kept his rifle low but visible. "Haven't seen anyone." The man smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "That's so. Because we tracked them heading this direction about 3 weeks ago, and this is the only property for miles. Now, I'm not saying you're lying, but I'm saying I haven't seen anyone." Wade cut in. His voice was flat, hard. "And I'm saying this is private property. You boys need to move on." The rider's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake, friend. There's a reward, $200. That's good money for just pointing us in the right direction." "Don't need your money, and I'm not your friend." The men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. The leader's face darkened. "You know what happens to people who harbor criminals." Wade cocked his rifle. The sound was loud in the evening quiet. "I know what happens to trespassers. Now get off my land." The standoff held. 10 seconds, 20, each one stretching like taffy. Wade could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could feel sweat sliding down his back despite the cool air. These men wanted blood, wanted violence, and Wade was giving them a reason to take it. But finally, the leader spat into the dirt. "You're making a mistake," he repeated. "We'll be back." They rode off, but Wade knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the question that haunted Wade as he watched them disappear into the darkness was simple and terrible. How do you protect someone when the whole world wants them dead? How do you fight when you're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time? And how much blood are you willing to spill to keep a promise to a dying man? Wade locked the gate and went inside, where Clara was standing with Samuel's revolver in her shaking hands. And he realized the answer: whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. Here's what they don't tell you about making a stand in the Old West. It's not the fight that changes you, it's the waiting. Wade spent the next 2 days waiting for them to come back, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. He moved through his routines like a man walking through water. Every action weighted with the knowledge that violence was coming. Clara felt it too. She stopped planting her garden, stopped humming those wordless tunes she'd started singing while she cooked. She just sat by the window with Samuel's revolver in her lap, one hand on her belly, watching the horizon like it might sprout teeth and swallow them whole. On the second night, she finally asked the question Wade had been dreading. "What if I just left? What if I rode out tonight headed north, and you told them you never saw me?" Wade looked at her across the kitchen table. This woman who'd stumbled into his life half dead and somehow made his empty house feel like a home. "You think I could live with myself after that? You'd be alive to live with yourself," Clara shot back, and there was fire in her eyes now. The kind of fire that comes from loving people and losing them and refusing to let it happen again. "I won't watch another good man die for me, Wade. I won't." "Then don't watch," Wade said quietly. Close your eyes if you have to. But you're not leaving. Clara's face crumpled, and for a moment, Wade thought she might argue, might fight him on it. But instead, she just nodded, wiped her eyes and whispered, "James would have liked you." Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing at all. They came on the third night, just after sunset, when the light was dying and the shadows were long. 6 of them this time, the 5 from before, plus 1 more, all armed, all grim-faced, and ready for violence. Wade heard them before he saw them, heard the thunder of hooves and the rattle of tack, and his blood went cold. He grabbed his rifle, yelled for Clara to get to the root cellar, and stepped onto his porch. The leader, that scar-faced bastard with eyes like winter, reined up at the gate and didn't bother with pleasantries this time. "Last chance, friend. Hand them over or we come in and take them." Wade raised his rifle. "You can try." The man's face twisted into something ugly. "Burn him out, boys." And that's when everything went to hell. The first shot came from Wade, punching through the leader's shoulder and spinning him half out of his saddle. The rest scattered, returning fire, bullets chewing splinters from Wade's porch and singing through the air like angry hornets. Wade dropped behind the porch railing, working the lever on his rifle, picking his shots. He clipped another man in the leg, sent a third diving for cover behind the fence. But there were too many, and they were spreading out, flanking, trying to surround the house. Wade was about to retreat inside when he heard the crack of a pistol behind him and saw Clara standing in the doorway, Samuel's revolver smoking in her hands. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to scatter 2 men trying to circle around. Wade yelled at her to get back, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was firing again, her face set with a fury Wade hadn't seen before. The fury of a woman who'd already lost everything and refused to lose anything more. Then, like the hand of God reaching down, a shotgun blast roared from the darkness beyond the gate. Wade's nearest neighbor, a rancher named Garrett who lived 5 miles east and mostly kept to himself, emerged from the gloom on horseback with 2 of his ranch hands flanking him. Garrett levered another shell into his shotgun, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "That's enough!" The attackers froze, suddenly outnumbered, suddenly uncertain. Garrett rode forward slowly, his shotgun never wavering. "Whatever bounty you're chasing ain't worth dying for. This is Wade's land, and Wade's business is Wade's business. Now you boys can ride out, or you can stay and see what happens. Your choice." The leader, clutching his bleeding shoulder and hate burning in his eyes, spat blood and venom. "This ain't over." "Yeah, it is," Garrett said flatly. "Now get." They left, wounded, furious, but they left. Wade watched them disappear into the darkness and felt his legs go weak. He slumped against the porch post, rifle dangling from one hand, and tried to remember how to breathe. Clara was beside him suddenly, her hands on his face, checking him for wounds he didn't have. "Are you hurt? Wade, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he managed. "I'm fine." Garrett dismounted, tipped his hat. "Heard shots. Figured you might need a hand." He glanced at Clara, then back to Wade, and something like understanding passed between them. "You're a good man, Wade Hutchins. Don't let anyone tell you different." "I owe you," Wade said. Garrett shook his head. "You don't owe me nothing, just doing what's right." He climbed back on his horse. "But Wade, next time someone comes looking, you send for me first. Here?" Wade nodded, and Garrett rode off into the night with his men, leaving Wade and Clara standing in the wreckage of almost violence, alive and whole, and together. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way Wade had forgotten quiet could be. The riders didn't come back. Word spread about Garrett's intervention, and suddenly, Wade's ranch was marked as more trouble than it was worth. Clara's belly grew. Wade finished the cradle he'd been building in secret, carved little horses into the sides, just like James had done, and, slowly, carefully, Wade's house stopped feeling empty and started feeling like something he'd never thought he'd have. A home. Spring came. Clara went into labor on a Tuesday morning, and Wade delivered the baby himself with shaking hands and prayers he'd forgotten he knew. A boy. Healthy, squalling, perfect. Clara held him against her chest and cried, and when she looked up at Wade, her eyes were full of something that looked like peace. "His name is James," she whispered. "After his father." Wade touched the baby's tiny hand and felt something break open in his chest, something he'd kept locked away for 15 years. "James," he repeated. "That's a good name." Now Wade stands in his garden, Clara's garden really, but he helps tend it, and watches Clara teach little James how to feed the chickens. The boy is 2 now, walking, talking, laughing with a sound that fills every corner of the house. And Wade realizes that mercy didn't cost him his peace after all. It gave him something better. Purpose, family, a reason to wake up each morning that isn't just routine. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do isn't drawing his gun, it's opening his door. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's also the most redemptive. So here's my question for you. What would you have done in Wade's position? Would you have turned them away to protect your peace, or would you have opened your door and let the world come crashing in? Drop your answer in the comments below, and if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more frontier stories about love, survival, hope, and redemption. Till next time.